What's up, collectors? So, for too long, interceptors have haunted our spaces, pillaging our ratters, killing our miners. But today, a local shaman has told me that there may be a mythical build that can help purge our lands of these scourges. So we're gonna go into the wilderness of Colorado and see if we can't find this mythical destroyer. I didn't believe it either. One thing that you have to understand about killing interceptors is that they're fast little boogers. And so we need to be able to get them down, pin them down, and then blow them up before they have a chance to escape. In order to do that, they're going to be moving really fast, so I want a damage type and a weapon type that's not going to be dependent on tracking speed. I'm also going to be going for a relatively cheap ship here because, let's be honest, I'm cheap. So I'm going to focus on an unlikely ship type, which is a destroyer. And specifically, I'm going to be using the Corax. I'm going to make a disclaimer as I'm making this video, and that is, the build you're about to see is very specialized. I don't want you to take this and say, oh, Brandon said that this is the best destroyer build and it'll just save all of my issues. No, bad. This is going to be specifically designed to kill an interceptor and hopefully kill it in one shot. I want to make sure that that is very clear. There are going to be decisions that I'm going to make in this fit that I would not make in any other case. And that is intentional. Now that I've covered my butt appropriately, let's actually start blowing stuff up. All right, so before I go any further here, I want to take a quick minute and just make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of how damage is actually applied for missiles. Now there's 4 different factors that play into this. And so there's 2 that we as the shooter control, and then there's 2 as the person who is the shootee can control. Now, the 2 that the shooter can control is going to be the explosion radius and the explosion velocity. If you think about a balloon inflating, the explosion radius is going to be the total size of that balloon right before it pops. So if you're blowing it up and then it pops, that moment right before, that's the explosion radius, all right? Now the explosion velocity is basically how fast that balloon actually inflates. So if we have a large missile that has a explosion velocity of 80 meters per second versus a small missile which has 170 meters per second explosion velocity, that smaller missile is going to get to that edge of the explosion radius a lot faster than the large missile. The way that these 2 apply together is that when you look at the total damage that each missile is going to apply, it basically will take the explosion radius and it will, for each increment, it will apply a certain amount of that damage. So the faster that that damage is filled and the smaller that radius is, the better that you're going to actually be able to apply damage to your target. For the target or the shootee, the 2 factors that you're going to have are going to be your speed and your signature radius. Now speed is self-explanatory, everybody's pretty familiar with that, but your signature radius is basically going to say how big of a target you have, and if you have a bigger target, it is going to stay in that explosion radius longer, and therefore you're going to be able to apply damage to that target for longer as part of that explosion. Now, unlike turrets, the missiles will always hit, and the only thing that you have to be aware of is if you are going to actually apply damage, because if your target is small enough and fast enough, they may be able to outrun that explosion velocity and get out of that explosion radius before you can actually be really applying damage. You see this a lot when you're having small frigates speed tanking against a larger battleship. like a Raven. So what we're going to be trying to do here is we're either going to be using the explosion radius and getting that down as far as possible, getting the explosion velocity up as far as possible, or we're going to use like a target painter or something like that in order to actually increase the signature radius of whatever ship we're targeting. Now, with an interceptor, that signature radius is going to be larger than normal if they're using a micro warp drive, which most of them are, but they do have the benefit of the bonuses that will actually reduce that while they're still going around and speed tanking. So for that reason, we're going to actually use the Corax Assualt, which is going to be the T7 destroyer for the Caldari, and we're going to be looking at this ship because with max skills, you end up getting a 50% bonus to the explosion velocity, and that outperforms pretty much any other rig modifier or anything like that. And so even that already high explosion velocity of a small missile at 170 meters per second is going to go up, if I do my math right, I think it's going to end up being around 235 meters per second. And that's going to be fast enough that we should be able to catch pretty much anything. But then also with the web bonus that it gets, we'll be able to web targets out to 18 kilometers, if not a little bit more, depending on how blingy you want to get with those webs. So with that being said, we're going to go through, and on the test server, I'm going to set up a Interceptor and a Corax, and just seeing what gets us the best damage so that we can try to kill these Interceptors with only one shot. So with that, I'm going to jump back into the studio and meet you guys back at home. Now that we've gone and gotten a bunch of bug bites and sunburn, what I want to do is actually go into the test server. I've set up a Corax Assault against a Condor Interceptor, and I'm going to be testing this by swapping out a couple of different rigs and then using a single missile, firing at that interceptor, putting on first no webs, and then one web, and then two webs, and then three webs, and basically trying a bunch of different combinations to see where we get the most damage. Now, I'm not going to make you watch all of this because it took me about 2 hours, and I don't think anybody really wants to watch all of that. But I will go ahead and pop this up on the screen, and I'm going to walk you through exactly what the best damage type actually is. I went with 3 different rig setups. First, I did all Warhead Califaction rigs, which increases my damage. I did use the T3 rig, so I get the 17.5% bonus. Then I also tried the Warhead Rigger Catalyst, which decreases my size. Again, that's going to give me a T3 rig, and I'm going to be getting a 14% reduction in the explosion radius. And then finally, I'm going to be trying the Warhead Flare Catalyst, which is going to give me a explosion velocity bonus of 15%. Now, because the Corax already gets that bonus to the explosion velocity, this is going to make it even faster. And so when I went into trying this, I actually thought that the Flare would be the best option. But as you can see here on the screen, I've got the final results here. And what ended up happening is if we're going for just straight no webs damage, nothing was able to actually apply any damage when the Interceptor was moving at full speed. When we got one web on, the Rigger actually did the best. When we had 2 webs on, the Rigger still did the best. And then when we had 3 webs on, finally, that's when the Califaction ×3 actually did catch up. We were applying slightly more total damage. Now, the reason that I will actually not be using all 3 rigs is because after testing this, I don't think that I will actually be able to kill a Ceptor in one shot. Now, I was testing these with the Caldari Navy small missile launchers instead of the Type C small missile launchers. And if I were to go up into maybe the Disciple or even to that Type C, I probably would be able to actually get to the point where I'm able to one-shot these Ceptors, and it would make sense to put 3 webs on. But I'm going to actually be using the Caldari because with the way that the current insurance system is set up, I'm going to be more likely to spend a lot of money on rigs because I'm always going to get those back versus a mod that might drop. And I don't really want to be dropping a 20 million ISK missile launcher when I can be using a 2 million ISK and only use 2 webs and just take a second shot. The funny thing here is the way that this worked out was actually exactly how I hoped when I started to do the testing on the real server, but I was having trouble finding some actual Ceptors to fight, and so I ended up jumping into a situation I probably shouldn't have done or shouldn't have engaged with. What I did is we had a situation where there were 5 enemy Ceptors. They were all out on a gate in our territory, and I said, YOLO, let's do this. Jumped in, and well, I got 2 of them, so that's something, right? If it had just been 1 Ceptor, I think I obviously would have killed it pretty easily. If I had just been a little bit more familiar with this ship and actually piloted it a little bit better, I might have been able to get a 3rd one. But you can see kind of the limitations here. This is not a 1v5 ship. Probably shouldn't have done that, but it was fun, and I needed footage, so you guys got something funny, and I just blew up, so it's fine. The one other nuance here that you'll see is that I am using a afterburner instead of a micro warp drive. I'm actually using a medium afterburner. I did that by getting some additional rigs here on the power grid. After testing, I don't know if I really need this. I think you probably could get away with just using a small afterburner or even a micro warp drive. The only reason I didn't use the micro warp drive was because it can be shut off. That being said, the range of the webs that you're going to be using is greater than any scram, at least right now. I think you could use a micro warp drive. I think that would give you a little bit more speed and give you a little bit more survivability, because you would be able to kite a lot easier and still be able to get away from some of those Ceptors if you needed to. Well, guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit like, subscribe, do all the things. And if you're looking for more content, I actually did a podcast with Sheev Palpatine over on his channel. I'll put a link up here or wherever it is in the card. So be sure to check that out. And until next time, fly safe.